introduced you as amazing individuals, because I truly believe you are, and I believe that it's really people who make a difference. It's people who build organizations. It's people who drive change. And actually, one of my favorite quotes is that the only people who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones who do. So thank you for being with us tonight, for all of your commitment, and we'd love to hear your perspectives and learn from your experiences. So my first question will be, can you please tell us about your journey to becoming philanthropists? So basically, when and why?
You asked about my personal journey. I think our journey into philanthropy, I'm joined this evening by my husband, David, for both of us has been deeply personal. We both were born and grew up during the height of apartheid in South Africa. I also returned to South Africa after attending college in the States and was a new teacher, now I'm going to age myself, but in the government's pilot model school for desegregated education. Thankfully, that was a long time ago. David and I witnessed firsthand the devastating impacts of systemic inequality. From both of us, that demanded a lot of introspection and some action. We were privileged enough to find ourselves at a point in our lives and careers where about 20 years ago, we arrived with our family in New York. It was during this time that we realized we had some spare capacities. During other professions, we developed some skill sets. We understood that we had a little bit of time and some financial resources. And our family motto, the motto with which we brought up our 3 kids, was that actions speak louder than words. And so David and I turned to each other and said, we have thought about engaging in this world in a different way for so long. Let's actually show our kids what we mean. And so then it was that we had the opportunity to establish our foundation. This was about 20 years ago, and we have been working in the space ever since.
Thank you, Lisa. And congratulations. Gbenga, can I ask you the same thing? Your journey, when and why?
First, let me say, I like the way Lisa put it. We had some spare capacity. That means we had some change.
Not only financial capacity.
No. But I think, honestly, when I think about it, it's really when you say how we got here as philanthropists. I tend to think of philanthropy as something that all of us do, and I tend to think all of us in this room are philanthropists in our own different ways. And as Lisa says, it's born out of experience. It's born out of the challenges, in my case, born out of challenges that I grew up in Nigeria, going to school in a part of Nigeria, Ekiti State. My former first lady is sitting here. But going to school in a part of Nigeria that was very poor. So poor that I once gave a talk for the End Fund, and I said to them, think of going to high school in a part of the country where 40 years ago, every second woman you saw had goiter. Every second woman you saw was, in Yoruba, we call it Gbegbe. They had, it was common. And every time it was not difficult. You didn't have to travel too far to see somebody that had elephantiasis. Something that we saw. It was almost, every time you walked the streets. So that experience taught me a bunch of lessons. First, that don't assume that where you're coming from is the way you should see the world. And so my parents made an effort to send me from a middle-class environment in Lagos to the farthest they could send me. And I learned the lessons that were intended. And the lessons were, again, my people, the Yoruba say, look at your fingers, they're not equal. And there's a reason they're not equal. And so to whom much is given, for all of us that have spare capacity, we need to give back. And I learned that lesson.
Thank you, Gbenga. Staying with you. This morning you mentioned we need to be more strategic in giving. And we've discussed a lot of themes today, and we will again tomorrow. But strategy is trade-off. So to you, what are the priority areas where we should focus giving in Africa?
For me, maybe this will come across as a bit self-serving. Education is my sweet spot. And it's my sweet spot because I think that if we are able to establish a platform and on the basis for growth, for inclusion, for sustainability, then maybe we would have achieved. Again, I come from an environment where we like saying that we're a democracy, but democracy for us is one day we vote. But the democratic tradition is not instilled in us. So the next day after we've elected the leader, he treats us like he doesn't remember us, even though he canvassed for our votes. So I think if I could get education to prevent us voting ethnicity, if education can prevent us voting religion, then maybe we would have achieved. Now, I know that in North America, they're the most educated people in the world, and yet they still vote any way they want. But I think there has to be a basis for what we're trying to achieve. And so in most of the things that I've done, it's been around, let's create, let's put an underpinning of education, because at least it gets our people off the ground. Secondly, I think entrepreneurship. I think, look, again, across the continent, as I travel across, people want to work. People want to work. They want opportunities to be created. In actual fact, the opportunities abound, but we just don't know how to deliver it. And I think that if we were able to create wealth, and I don't mean create wealth at the top of the pyramid, I mean create jobs, create wealth at the bottom of the pyramid, I think we would have achieved. So again, I think it's about teaching people to fish, as opposed, and thank God we no longer just deliver fish. I think if we are able to do that, I think actually, and a lot of the conversations we've had today, the underpinning of those conversations are around this same subject matter. How do we get people to do what comes naturally to them? Our people are naturally capitalists. How can we get them to just do their businesses, create wealth, train their children, educate them, and get on with life? And in most cases on our continent, in spite of our governments. If we could do that, then I think we've achieved.
Thank you, Gbenga. So education and entrepreneurship.
And entrepreneurship.
So Lisa, to you as well, what are the priorities? And I believe education will probably be part of the answer.
Education is definitely certainly part of the answer. But if I could turn your question a little bit, I've been hearing all day today about different themes and different priorities. And there were a couple of things that struck me as I was thinking about this question tonight. And I think for all those philanthropists in this room, there's some of us who come from a healthcare background. There's some of us who come from a women and gender background. There's some of us who come from an education background or a business background. We need everybody. We need everybody. And we need everybody to identify what your core competency is. What do you bring into this room? What do you bring to your table? And that needs to be the priority. As we heard from, as I said, very many articulate speakers today, a person is not a school or a health issue or a nutrition issue or a gender issue. They all are connected. The other thing that struck me about some of the discussion of themes and priorities today is something I'm learning as I'm getting a little bit older and maybe a little bit wiser in my life, is this learning this ability to hold two things at the same time, which often seem very contradictory. We heard about that this is a marathon, not a sprint. We mustn't look to Jamaica, we must look to the Kenyans. That is true. This is a marathon. But ladies and gentlemen, these issues are urgent. They are urgent. We heard about a time of abundance. We have so many resources. At the same time, there are such huge percentage of our populations that do not. We heard from a very good friend of mine about being idealistic and pragmatic. We have to dream big. We have to have aspirational visions. But sitting around dreaming big and having aspirational visions does not get anything done. We need to have strategic plans and be pragmatic. Collaboratives, a lot of themes, a lot of discussion the last few days about collaboratives. How do we collaborate and work together and at the same time figure out how to dismantle power dynamics and check egos at the door? These things are hard. They will take the skills of each one of you and the competencies of us all.
Thanks, Lisa. You got your marching orders. Now, we all know there's a lot of informal giving on the African continent, with people supporting their direct circles or communities. How could we encourage more structured African giving for better outcomes? Lisa.
I was hoping you were not going to get to me first. I think in our case, our giving evolved. When David and I got into philanthropy those 20 years ago, quite frankly, and I've never admitted it publicly, I had not heard the word philanthropy before. I actually didn't know what the sector was about or what it entailed to set up a foundation. I learned from the likes of you, from these kind of communities, but more importantly in my case, from the programmatic partners close to the issues, who were proximate, who lived close to where they worked, and those were the people, some of them in this room, from whom I learned the most. I think in terms of strategy and becoming more strategic, which I certainly believe we need to do, the first investment needs to be in people. The people most impacted by these issues and the challenges or opportunities that we are trying to solve for. Those are the people who can actually drive the impact and strengthen the ecosystems that all of our fancy strategies need in order to be impactful in any way.
So strategy and strategic giving is at the heart of what the APF consistently talks about. And it's because, one of my favorite sayings is about how, we give. We give all the time. You get phone calls, text messages, somebody in the village needs help, and you send what you can. And this is a total aside. So with increasing challenges in an economy like Nigeria's, so interest rates are at 32%, inflation is at 30%. We're paying 4 times more for fuel, all in the last 15 months. I wake up every morning and there's a litany of requests, some from people I know and from some that I don't know. I then tell my wife, I say to her, this and this and this, on my phone. So she says, what are you going to do? And it's the way my mother taught me, that if I give all my money to these people, how much will be left for me? Because in actual fact, there is a mad rush to identify people who there's a perception that you are well-to-do. Mm-hmm. But if we organize things better, if we went into a local community and instead of us contributing to send one person to India for surgery, if we could build a primary health care center, such as would prevent further down the road the need to send anybody to India for surgery. Because that's very typical in Nigeria. Huh? We all crowdfund and we send you off. Huh? And so, for me, that's the strategy that I see that I think is critical to the things that we do. Our ability to sit back and say, what's most important in this community? Is it a school? Is it a hospital? Is it mentorship? Because sometimes what we require in local schools is a role model. Your ability, when you say we're philanthropists, I say we're all philanthropists because if you could just devote 1 hour every week and spoke to students, maybe they can see in you what, that aspiration, they look down the road and say, I'd just like to be like this man. And so for me, that's what I think strategy is our ability to send a signal around to say, let's pool resources. We can't teach strategy to people at the top of the pyramid, multinational organizations, international corporates, significant oligarchs in our societies, because the strategy is how they got to where they are. But I think we can do strategy at the bottom of the pyramid by that collaborative effort that we've talked about most of today, how we can sit around and say, what are the ways in which we will change the paradigm in these communities? And I think it can be done.
Okay, so there's something about pooling resources,
Yes.
competencies together, and probably platforms like this one.
Yeah.
What do you think is the actual value of the African Philanthropy Forum? Why are you the chair?
No. And at the, not wanting to repeat myself from this morning, the two things, the strategy, but the convening power. There are not very many organizations on our continent like APF, not very many that can pull this event with the different stakeholder groups that are sitting in this room. And I think that if I were to hazard a guess, there are many other groups that are having these conversations, but not with the audience that we have here. And so that convening power, the ability of the APF to say, let's go to Accra and do a regional convening. Let's go to Dakar. Let's go to Cote d'Ivoire. Let's go to Nairobi. And by the way, these are all places that we have been, where we sit down with local groups and are having a conversation. Now, not everybody in those regional convenings can get on the plane and come to Marrakesh. And I believe that that's the strength of the APF. I also think that, and I know we had a session on Start Point earlier on today. I think it's important for us to extend the reach, particularly around the platforms like Start Point that the APF has in helping local philanthropic organizations, not just the philanthropic organizations, but the communities and people who need and use our services, to understand that there are platforms that they can use to not just to reach, but to explain the challenges that they face and the resolutions that we can put on the table for them. So for me, those are the two key things that the APF does well. It's part of why where we want to go from having biennial meetings to having yearly meetings. Why? Because we think that our reach is far and deep, and we think that there's a need on the continent. And if there's one thing I agree with Lisa on, the urgency is of now, it's of today. It's not, it's nice to do strategy and say we're doing 5 years, but actually the gaps that we see in our societies are today. They stare us in the face. People are dying every day. People can't get to school. If I told you that I think that 15 million out of school children in Nigeria is not the accurate number. By the way, it's significantly higher than that. So how can we continue to just talk about it when actually we need to do something about it? And those are the real issues, that the APF would like to resolve and move ahead on.
Thank you, Chair. And Lisa, so as a family foundation, what keeps you coming back and encourages you to be a member of the APF?
So thank you for that question, and I certainly realize I am an invited guest here today. As we were walking into the room, my husband turned to me. I said, I'm feeling a little nervous. He said, you'll be fine, just be yourself. He said, no, actually, don't be yourself. He said, you're likely to be contentious and stir the room, rather just act like me. But no, I am going to be myself. So I think there are a couple of things that keep me coming back. I think it's all of you in this room. So we all have been invited into this room. We are now here at these tables. I urge you to take a moment to think for yourself, who else should be in this room? Who else do you know that should be at these tables with us having these conversations? And as we extend maybe to annual meetings, maybe there's enough space in our tent and our room for some of these other voices. I have a few ideas in mind, but perhaps we could talk afterwards. The second thing that I would urge you to do this evening, I suspect some of you are sitting next to your friends and people you know very well. Some of you are meeting people for the first time. I wonder if there's a conversation that you could have with your neighbor where you ask the person sitting next to you, what is it that you do really, really well? What could I learn from you? And in exchange, what is it that you are wanting to learn that perhaps I could help you with? Let's get to know each other on a different level and in a different way and figure out if there are ways that we could continue to work together. This is an extraordinary space. When I hear in my mind the conversations we've had today, perhaps 4 people on a panel is too much because we didn't get into the weeds of what some of you were wanting to say. I just wanted more. I wanted to know more. Have these conversations at dinner. And the one last thing. It strikes me over and over and over again that very few people hold philanthropists accountable. Our program partners cannot do it. Our staff and team members often cannot do it. Our board members often do not do it. The people who can hold us accountable are each other. Really, in the current way, the current power dynamic works, it's the only people. Let's use these forums and the platform to make sure that we are holding each other accountable, as I said yesterday, to the same standards that we hold those people to whom we grant funding. Thank you.
Now, Gbenga, I know you're passionate about accountability as well and transparency. Do you want to rebound on Lisa's comments?
I don't want to get into
A bit of a
going
debate
back and
with
forth
you.
on it. I think accountability is particularly important. I think let's break philanthropy into its constituent parts. So there are organizations around the world whose view of how they impact on community is by giving. But they tend to give unlent or funding that's directed at them from another organization. So they tend to light a fire under you and set rules for giving. There are organizations who their way of giving is by implementation themselves. So they don't have to explain to any of us what their rules are. I think what's important, what's critical, is execution. How do you execute a basic need? Look, one of my biggest arguments on some of the philanthropy boards I'm on is when people tell me that they no longer do education, but they do advocacy. And I say my problem in Africa is not advocacy. We talk to each other enough, we know what the problem is. But we have to get our hands dirty. It's nice to advocate for something, but it's better to build the school. It's better to hire the teacher. And so, again, I live on a continent where the whole concept of a social entrepreneur is not clear to all of us. We have to define it properly, understand what a social entrepreneur does. A social entrepreneur is very different from an entrepreneur that wants to run his own business. So to use an example that I know well, being a founder of a Teach For country is totally different from running your own school. And it's one of the reasons why I like our whole theory around Teach For All. So we tell people that we are locally led, but globally informed. The locally led part of Teach is because on the ground, nobody from New York can come and tell you how to run a school in Lagos. But there's methodology for achieving that objective. And that methodology is the globally informed piece of that engagement. So I think, again, for me, it's all about collaboration. It's about us sitting and understanding. There's no point, we shouldn't have to fill out 100 pieces of paper to explain how we spent $1,000. And I agree entirely with you that we see too much of that in philanthropy.
Okay. So now looking to the future, what do you both hope to see more of in African philanthropy? Who
Would
wants
you
to
like
take
to
it
go
first?
ahead?
What do I hope to see more of? There's this, there's a way in which we contextualize Africa and make it look like as if we haven't achieved anything. What do I intend to see more of? One of the things that I like most about this audience is the numbers of African actors, stakeholders, owners of their own enterprises, people who are doing things on the ground, because that's the most important piece of APF. What do I want to see more of? I just want to see us execute better. We talk too much about a problem, we execute very poorly on the problem. And recognizing that our governments tend not to add. They tend to add to the problem as opposed to the solution. So for me, if we leave this convening with a deeper understanding of what our issues are, If we, at the end of 2.5 days, we've widened our network of change agents, if we commit to collaborating, we cannot say that people cannot have single interest organizations, but there must be something about all of us meeting regularly to talk about how we can build, how we can deliver on the results of the promise. And for me, that's what's important about a convening of this sort.
Super. So what would I like to see in the future? I think the first thing is I do think, once again, based on where I started this conversation tonight, this work is really, really hard. So I think we do need to take a moment to appreciate ourselves and to celebrate. On the flip side, in my vision of the future, we make ourselves obsolete because we solve these problems. In no other sector would we stay in business for so long without solving the problems. Guys, let's get them solved. You can't keep doing the same thing over and over and over again and expecting a different result. What ways can we do this differently? Which ways can we execute better? We're talking to each other. Where is government? Where are the other actors and stakeholders? Who else do we need to include in these conversations? If we've been funding the same way over and over again, I urge you to stop for a moment and think. Is there a different and a better way to fund? If we're wondering why kids are not going to school, well, maybe the schools aren't working for them. Maybe we need a different way of education. Let's start solving these problems.
Well, you're both very inspiring. So maybe just one last message for our guests, 30 seconds each. Lisa?
I am privileged and honored to do this work. I know with that privilege and honor comes a lot of responsibility, and I take it seriously, and I believe with all of us together taking this seriously, we will, maybe not in my lifetime, but perhaps in some of yours, really solve some of these problems. So thank you.
My last word. I think it's important for us to recognize that the urgency is now. It's not about, let's come back next year and have this same conversation all over again. The realities of our lives. I had a conversation in New York a week ago, and everybody was talking about Palestine, Ukraine, but nobody in the room talked about Sudan. So Sudan is a forgotten war. But more people have died in Sudan than in all the other conflicts, at least in the last 1 year. So the world is not paying attention to our challenges, to our problems. It leaves us with only one real solution. It's ours to deal with. And it's ours to deal with now, not tomorrow. It's ours to collaborate and look for solutions. It's ours to catalyze and look for the transformation agenda. But clearly, it's ours to deal with today. Whether it's out-of-school children, whether it's marginalized populations, the girl child, whether it's desertification or climate in the Sahel, whether it's democracy and the need for a reform of our rules, All of them are clear and present dangers to our existence. And therefore, we need to battle them, fight them, do what needs to be done to win, but to win for our people.
Well, thank you very much.